Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We just finished going through all of the Torah references to circumcision, including the one in Joshua, where we learned that before the Israelites were allowed to enter the Promised Land, they camped out, they were all circumcised, then celebrated a Passover, which is fitting considering they were passing over a river at the time. So we're going to move on into the prophets. And speaking prophetically of the redemption and deliverance of Jerusalem, Isaiah declares in chapter 52, verse 1, "Awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion, put on your garments of splendor, O Jerusalem, the set-apart city, for no more do the uncircumcised and the unclean come into you." So again, not speaking, to this I'm speaking very much of physical circumcision, because these were driving out the invaders, or not driving out, but this is prophetic. So Jerusalem being delivered, saying that there will be no uncircumcised people there, and it also equates being uncircumcised with being unclean. So again, a negative use of uncircumcised, and again, this is in Yahowah's words. This isn't Isaiah speaking. Well, it is Isaiah speaking, but on behalf of Yahowah. Unlike the "but I" Paul's that you read throughout his writings, Isaiah is always saying Yahowah says, and this is something Yahowah had said and declared. So again, speaking of Zion, which is Israel, in Jerusalem, the set-apart city, it says, "No more do the uncircumcised and the unclean come into you." Like I said, this is prophetic of the redemption and deliverance of Jerusalem. So that would be after the Armageddon War and everything else in Yah's return. So there will be no uncircumcised then. Moving on, in Jeremiah 4, we read, and again I'm going to read from the Scriptures translation, just because I haven't had time to amplify all these myself. I have looked at the most pertinent words to make sure they're not translated wrong. I've kind of done a once-over check on it, but I haven't actually translated it myself, so I'm just going to use theirs. And like I said, I do not recommend this one. It's just the best of a horrible lot. So we read, starting with Jeremiah chapter 4, we're going to read verses 1 through 4. "If you do return, O Israel, declares Yahowah, return to me. And if you remove your abomination from my presence and cease straying, and shall swear, as Yahowah lives in truth, in right ruling and in righteousness, then nations shall bless themselves in him, and they shall boast in him. For this is what Yahowah said to the men of Yehudah and to Jerusalem. Break up your tillable ground, and do not sow among thorns. Circumcise yourself unto Yahowah, and take away the foreskins of your heart, you men of Yehudah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my wrath come forth like fire and burn, with none to quench it, because of the evil of your deeds." So again, Yahweh is equating circumcision of the heart to returning to him, restoring your relationship, abandoning your evil ways, and returning to him. So again, circumcision, this time of the heart, which like I said, there is an argument to be made that we do need to be circumcised of the heart. It comes up a lot. It is important, but it is not as important as circumcision of the flesh, according to Yah. Because circumcision of the heart, well, Yah says he will do it for us. We can also do it by turning away from politics, religion. So when we leave man's ways and follow Yah, we are circumcising our hearts. It's used to reference that. So then we read again, if you go to the 6th chapter of Jeremiah, and we'll start at verse 10, it reads, "See, the ear is uncircumcised, and they are unable to listen. See, the word of Yahowah is a reproach to them. They do not delight in it." And, again, Arel, so literally the ear is stubborn, unrepentant, unhearing, and unresponsive. A very negative connotation. It's saying they don't see the word of Yahweh. They don't, listen to Yah's word. It's actually a reproach to them. He calls this is the same as when Moshe referred to his lips as being uncircumcised. It's not that they're literally not cut, but that it's just this negative connotation. And again, this isn't like it was with Moshe. Moshe saying it. This is Yahweh saying it. And, find this whole second part. The word of Yahweh is a reproach to them. They do not delight in it. This just reminds me of anytime you debate a religious person and you try and cite Yahweh's word for them. They hate it. They don't delight in it. They don't, want to hear it. They're stubborn. They're unrepentant. They're unhearing, and they're unresponsive. I know you've had an incident like this fairly recently with people, you care about, and you tried to bring up Yah's word, and they got upset at you for bringing out a copy of the Torah to read to them. They didn't delight in Yah's word. It was a reproach to them. It would be fair to say that their ear is uncircumcised in Yah's parlance.
Yeah.
So, again, it's being used by Yahweh in a very negative and, dare I say, derogatory sense. So being uncircumcised isn't just something, a lot of the things you'll read, they try and explain this in terms of, being uncircumcised was viewed by the Jews as a, lesser thing, and the Jews had this belief about it and this connotation, so it was a derogatory term for them. Which it was. That's all 100% true. It was used as a derogatory term by Jews for others throughout history. But, like I said, this isn't a Jew saying it. Well, I guess you could say it is. It's Yahweh. But, this is God saying it. This is his view, not just the Jewish people. This isn't a Jewish cultural view. This is Yahweh's view. So, that's Jeremiah 6:10. Moving on, you have Jeremiah 9, where Yahweh says he will punish the circumcised and uncircumcised alike because they have forsaken his Torah. And this is important because, while it is impossible to participate in Yah's family without being circumcised, just because you're circumcised don't mean you're part of his family. If you forsake his Torah, you can be, there are plenty of people who are circumcised and don't know Yah. For example, my family circumcised me. My family was not part of the covenant. My family was not really religious at all. As I tell people, my father's family was Catholic. My mother's was Lutheran. If religion was important to either one of them, I wouldn't be here because Catholics and Lutherans don't tend to get along. So, I was not raised in a religious home, but my parents did circumcise me. That don't mean I was part of Yah's family from that point on. I was not saved by circumcision. Circumcision, so, what this is saying is, while circumcision can preclude you from being part of the family, it does not guarantee admission. You don't just get a snip and then you're done. You have, you cannot forsake his Torah. You have to embrace his Torah. If you want to be a part of Yah's family, you have to embrace the covenant. You have to be part of the covenant. You have to embrace his Torah, walk his path, and, part of that is being circumcised. So, while circumcision is not it is not salvation, it does not save you, it can preclude you from salvation. And that's I get from this verse, He's going to punish the circumcised and uncircumcised alike because they forsake his Torah. And his Torah is his covenant. All that. So it's not going to save you, but it is necessary. Then we go to Ezekiel. In chapter 28, verse 10, Yahweh tells the prince of Zoar that he will suffer the death of the uncircumcised. Now, this is an interesting one because I had a little fun with this because I read this and I'm like, wow. And if you're reading an English translation, it says the death of the uncircumcised. But the fact is, death, muth here, was in the plural form, which means death, plural. And, there's kind of two schools of thoughts I found when I looked this up as to what this phrase means. And, you can call it, you be the judge of what you think it means. But one school of thought says that it means an ignoble death. a dishonorable death, a horrible death. That it was just a phrase being used to convey a really bad death. And the other school of thought is that it means a physical and eternal death. And if you read, there's a group of books called the Targum, and I don't recommend them in terms of being really worth anything, other than what I was going to say is, if you read in there, their interpretation is the latter, that this means two deaths, a physical and eternal death. And the only reason I bring it up is because of the dating. And the Targums date to the early first, I believe there are some even found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, so like the first, second century BCE. And so like I said, well, I don't think their interpretations tend to mean, jack, in my opinion. It's basically the interpretations of a bunch of rabbis. It's Aramaic translations of the Torah, Prophets, Psalms, with commentary added in. But my point was that this was the older version. This is how people of that time period tended to view this verse. The later, I didn't find anything other than late 18th century and on that had that interpretation, the ignoble death interpretation. So, the one existed long before the other. And like I said, you have two to choose from, but the fact that Muth is in the plural, to me, supports the latter interpretation. Like I said, it's the death of the uncircumcised, meaning he will suffer a physical death and then an eternal death. And this goes back to the whole concept of souls being mortal and dying. God told us that death and destruction is the wide path. And so his soul, this prince of Zor, will suffer both deaths. He will die physically, and then he will die eternally. His soul will die. Now, like I said, the ignoble death to me doesn't make sense. Why would God use the term Muth at all? Why would he use death of the uncircumcised if he was trying to say just a horrible death? He has a way for that. It's wrong. He could have said he will die a bad death. He will die a wicked death, a cruel death. He could have described it in any of those ways, but he chose to use the term death, plural, of the uncircumcised. So, like I said, I'm going to leave it up to you to determine what you think it means. And Patty, you can tell me what you think it means after the break. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We left off, we were discussing Ezekiel 28, verse 10, and Yahowah telling the prince of Zor that he will suffer the death of the uncircumcised. We were talking about how there are two ways of viewing this. One is that this just means a horrible or ignoble death, and the other that it means a physical and then eternal death. And I was pointing out that the current form of Muth would support the latter, and that the latter is also the older interpretation. So if you read that, in terms of this is a bad guy. That's the context. We were given a little bit of what this guy's done. And then we were told that he will suffer the death of the uncircumcised. How would you interpret that?
I would just say that he was going to just cease to exist.
Exactly. The two deaths. Physical death, his body will die, and then his soul will die. Like I said, that's how I interpret it. Someone else may find another interpretation, but the ignoble death just doesn't make sense to me, because we are dealing with Yahowah, who is, in my opinion, the greatest communicator who ever lived. And if that was what he wanted to convey, he could have conveyed it. But I'll also point out, even if that weren't the case, the fact that he used the term, again, uncircumcised in a derogatory way, would be, still not a triumph for those who argue that circumcision is unimportant. Yeah, this is one of those ones that I was talking about. I missed the first time I went into this study because I didn't look up RL. So this one was there, and when I came across this, it was just like, wow, y'all just told us that those who are uncircumcised are dead spiritually, and that's the only way I can see to interpret that. So we'll move on. Like I said, we're going to try and beat as many nails into this coffin as we can. And Ezekiel 32, verse 18, we read, "Son of man, mourn and lament upon the multitude of Mitzrayim, Egypt. She causes you to send her down, her and her daughters of the mighty nations, unto the below region, Hati Eret, of the lowest part, the region below the surface of the earth, the realm of the grave and death, descending, Yared, being lowered and brought down to the pit, bore, hole, or depression in the ground, a prison or a dungeon, a pit in the ground for prisoners, death, the figurative extension of a pit as a place of corruption. How are you more pleasant than others? Descend, be lowered and brought down, and lie down with the uncircumcised." Does that sound very good to you?
No.
Let's read that without any of the amplification. Let's make it a little clearer. Real easy. I know the amplification can get in the way sometimes and make it a little hard, especially on the air. When reading it, it's a lot easier, but when talking, it's a little harder. So we'll read it without the amplification. "Son of man, mourn and lament upon the multitude of Egypt. She causes you to send her down, her and the daughters of the mighty nations, unto the below region, descending to the pit. How are you more pleasant than others? Descend and lie down with the uncircumcised." So that's pretty derogatory. He is equating the place of the uncircumcised, lying down with the uncircumcised, with pit, with descending to the below region. And, by way of background, Mitzrayim was not a very good nation at this point. Egypt, Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. It means the crucible. They've never exactly been a good nation throughout their history, but, this is at a time of war and, all that. So this was not, these were not good people. They were being descended into this pit in the low region, which Yah equates to the place of the uncircumcised. And, actually, if you read and go to Ezekiel 32, you'll find 9 more examples where uncircumcised is used in this chapter. 9 times. Well, 10 if you count this one, in one chapter. And it lists a group of people, all bad nations, all nations that God is not too happy with, and it equates all of them to going to the pit, to going to Sheol, and to going to the, literally the place of the, excuse me, I'm sorry, I look at my foot there, but going to the place of the uncircumcised. 10 times in this one chapter. Every single one of them derogatory. This doesn't. If you were to read the 32nd chapter of Ezekiel, you would not come away with the place of the uncircumcised as a place you want to be. It equates it to the pit. It equates it to Sheol. All these very bad things. Does that sound like a place you want to go?
No.
Me neither. So, like I said, 10 times, go read through, and you'll find it, the same words are used in most English translations that I examine. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. When we left off, we were examining Ezekiel chapter 32, and we had just read verses 18 and 19, but, I was going to kind of skip over this and have people go read it, but I think it's bad enough and it's important enough. I'm going to go ahead and read through some of this, again, using the Scriptures translation. So starting in the 20th verse, we read, "In the midst of those slain by the sword they fell. She shall be given to the sword, drawing her and all her crowd. The mightiest among the mighty speak to him out of the midst of the grave with those who help him. They have gone down, they lie with the uncircumcised, slain by the sword. Bashura is there in all her assembly, with the graves all around her, all of them slain, fallen by the sword. Whose graves are set in the side of the pit, and her assembly is all around her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, because they instilled fear in the land of the living. There is Eliam in all her crowd, around her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword. They have gone down uncircumcised to the lower part of the earth, because they instilled fear in the land of the living, and they bear the shame of those going down to the pit. They have set her bed in the midst of the slain with all her crowd, and with her graves all around it, all of them uncircumcised, slain by the sword, for the fear they instilled in the land of the living. So they bear their shame with going down to the pit. In the midst of the slain they have been placed. There are Meshech and Tubal with all her crowd, with all their graves around it, all of them uncircumcised, slain by the sword, because they instilled fear in the land of the living. And they shall not lie with the mighty who are fallen of the uncircumcised, who have gone down to the grave with the battle gear, and those whose sword were laid under their head, but their crookedness are on the bones, because of their fear of the mighty in the land of the living. And you shall be broken in the midst of the uncircumcised, and lie with those slain with the sword." And it goes on. We'll keep reading. So we got a lot to read, so we'll go through it. "And they shall not lie with the mighty who are fallen of the uncircumcised." We already got that, sorry. 28. "And you shall be broken in the midst of the uncircumcised, and lie with those slain by the sword. There is Edom, her sovereigns, all her princes, who shall be given up in their might, those who are slain by the sword. With the uncircumcised they lie, and with those going down to the pit. There are princes of the north, all of them, and all of Sidonia, who have gone down with the slain, because of the fear they instilled. They are ashamed of their might. They lie uncircumcised with those slain by the sword, and bear the shame with those going down to the pit. Pharaoh and all his army shall see them, and he shall be confronted for all his hosts that were slain by the sword, declares Yahowah. For I have put a fear in him in the land of the living, yet he shall be placed in the midst of the uncircumcised, with those slain by the sword, Pharaoh and all his hosts, declares Yahowah." So, yeah, we just went through all this. Now, they're not saying that these people are going there because they were uncircumcised, but he calls it the place of the uncircumcised. Yeah, so it's not that they're there because they're uncircumcised. He lists why they're there, but he does call it the place of the uncircumcised. Which, how would you interpret that, Patty?
The place of the uncircumcised.
Yeah, if he equates it to the pit, and to Sheol and the grave. Could you read that and come to the conclusion that if you're not circumcised, Yah don't care?
No, obviously not.
Exactly. All right, moving on, we come to, and I believe this is going to be our last example of circumcision being mentioned in the prophets. And that's Ezekiel chapter 44. We read, "And Yahweh said to me, Son of man, place on your heart, see with your eyes, and listen with your ears to all which I am saying to you concerning all of the statutes of the house of Yehudah, and concerning his entire Torah. Place it in your heart. On the path and entrance to the household, and with regard to you setting forth from the temple, and you shall say to the rebellious one, to the house of Yisrael, that is what my foundation, the upright pillar, Yahweh says. Your greatest, most detestable abomination of all, in all of the house of Yisrael, is including sons of foreigners, uncircumcised of heart, and uncircumcised of flesh, to exist in my temple, to defile and profane it, and him. Alongside my home, in your coming near and approaching my bread, my finest and choicest oil and wine, and my blood, you broke my family-oriented covenant relationship by all your detestable abominations and not closely and personally observing the required functions of my set-apart and purifying one. And you were appointed to personally and carefully observe this required function concerning my temple on your behalf. Thus says my foundation, the upright pillar, Yahowah. Every foreigner, son, who is uncircumcised in heart and in the flesh shall not be included inside my temple. That's Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 5 through 9. Now, this one's an important reading because, one, we have God speaking both of circumcision of heart and flesh. So that answers the challenge that, circumcision of the heart is what matters, flesh doesn't matter. Now, here he's saying it's both. Now, the challenge I hear most on this verse is that, what God's condemning them for is the Levites or the Lowies shucking their job and, passing it on to foreigners, which is true. That in the context of the historical aspects of Ezekiel's time, that was what happened. They had kind of shirked their job and had brought in these foreigners to do it for them. And that is part of what Yahowah is condemning them for, is not doing the job they said, their job that they were assigned. But where this gets really interesting is the last verse. Every foreign son who is uncircumcised in heart and in the flesh shall not be included inside my temple. Now, people will say, okay, well, I'm not a Lowy. I don't need to be in there doing all that stuff anyways, and that's not all that important. But when you go look at what ties this together and makes this seem really important, or not seem, but makes this really important, is if you go to Revelation, and the 3rd chapter, verse 12, you read, all who are victorious will become pillars in the tabernacle of my God, in the temple of my God, and will never leave it, and I will write on them my name. So how are you going to be a temple or a pillar in the temple, in the tabernacle of God, if you're not allowed in there? I see you don't have an answer for that. Neither do I. If you're not, and if you can't enter the temple because you're not circumcised, it's kind of hard to be a pillar in it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
So that's why that one, like I said, that one's important for the two reasons. It points out that circumcision of flesh and heart are important, and then you're not in the temple, you can't be a pillar in the temple, and God said all those who are victorious will become pillars in the tabernacle. So, kind of sums it up right there. And that's all of the mentions we have of circumcision or uncircumcision and the Torah and prophets. Now, I left out anything related to Judges and Chronicles, where Orel does come up a few times, because the nature of those texts is they're not Yahowah speaking, although he does speak in them occasionally. But it's just a different nature than the prophet and the Torah, which is God speaking. But I checked several of the verses in there. If not every one, I'm not sure now. It's been a couple weeks since I did this. But and not one of them was in a positive way either. But most of them were being uttered by Israelites and would fall under that was a Jewish colloquialism, which it was. And, it was used as a derogatory term by the Jews. And that's what you find in those. So all I looked at was the Torah and the prophets. And, again, I may have missed some. I didn't sit there with a Hebrew copy of the Torah and prophets and go through and look for the word mole and Orel in every one. What I did was use Logos and did a search for them. And I have seen in the past where it does miss a thing or two. For whatever reason, it's, not perfect software. So if I did, I'm apologizing. Please send me that. I'd love to correct it and add it in, because I do plan on writing this up as a small document to include on the Yahowah forum. But the fact that we have, I think, close to 24 verses, or not verses, but sections we've read from today. Last count, there was something like 24, 25 sections. Most of them mentioned it in multiple verses, but of these, not one of them. Did we read anything today that put uncircumcision in a positive light or circumcision in a negative light?
No, it was fairly consistent.
Yeah, it's fairly consistent throughout. And, it's like people argue, how do you know that, this is trustworthy, with all the changes that have been made? And, what I hope, God kind of put a mechanism into his word that's kind of self-governing. People can corrupt it here and there, but he repeats himself a lot. So much to the point where that, when you come across something that is completely inconsistent with everything else, you kind of take a closer look and you can usually figure out where it got corrupted. And like I said, if there are any I missed, and there happens to be one that does put it in, uncircumcised in a positive light or circumcision in a negative light, I would be very skeptical of it, and I would love to examine it closer. So that's all of those, and we don't really get a whole lot of mention of circumcision in the Greek text, at least not from Yahowah. I believe, if I remember correctly, I lost my notes on that, but if I remember correctly, his only mention of it was in relation to circumcising on the Sabbath. When he's telling, people are arguing that he shouldn't heal on the Sabbath, he equates it to, do we not circumcise on the Sabbath? And of course, on the 8th day, if a child is born, and on the 8th day it happens to be a Sabbath, we still circumcise him. So again, Yahowah confirming circumcision on the 8th day. I don't believe he mentions it ever again. I could be wrong. It comes up a few. What?
Oh, I was just going to say, in that one where... Oh, I'll ask you when we come back.
Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're in the final segment of the show today. I actually wasn't sure we'd get through everything I had prepared. We got through every verse related to circumcision or uncircumcision. I also had a list of challenges I was going to try and get to, but I think we addressed most of them along the way. And really, challenges are negated when you look at what Yah said. There really isn't a challenge to be made. But we were discussing before the break, Yahowah says to you, and I said the only time I think I remember him mentioning circumcision was that it was to be done on the, it was okay to circumcise on the Sabbath. That was why it was okay for him to heal on the Sabbath. But you were going to say something about that, Patty.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I was just going to agree with you.
Okay.
Can't really think of anything to add to it. I'm sorry.
You're okay. I was going to say, though, it does come up a couple times in Acts, and that's in relation to Paul and, whether or not, his view that you don't need to be circumcised. And we see at the Jerusalem Summit, there's a whole debate on that. And, one of the things in there people love to point out is that after that, they sent out this letter to people telling them what they should do upon, newly entering the way. And that, circumcision isn't on there, therefore they were saying that you don't need to be circumcised to participate. But what they tend to ignore is that if you read right after that, they conclude with, because Moshe and the Torah are taught everywhere in the world, and if they want to know that, they can come to know it themselves. In other words, they were kind of doing what Yada does and what I like to do, which is, don't take my word for it, go look what Yah said. They kind of they did not want people doing what they're doing now, which is following what they say. They were like, there's some basic instructions, but go observe the Torah. Go look at God. He knows the right way. So that's the only real mentions of it you get in the Greek text, and that's where the whole debate comes from. So like I said, if you read through what we read through, which is every mention of circumcision in the Torah and prophets, there's no way to come to a conclusion other than Yah wants you to be circumcised. The only reason any debate exists on this is because of Paul. So that's it. Let's try and hit a few of these challenges real quick. One I hear a lot is that, circumcision is a sign of a change, and that the change is more important than the sign, but if you want to get this, the sign, you can. And, that goes back to the whole circumcision of the heart versus circumcision of the flesh, and that circumcision of the heart's more important. And we already addressed that. That, what God's saying is, no, this isn't just a sign, this is a must. You can't participate in Passover without it. You've nullified the covenant if you're not circumcised. You can go on and on. There's no debate there. That's a no-starter. Let's see. We have, what about a person who is unable to be circumcised for medical or monetary reasons? People will ask that a lot. And, one, I've known several people who, I don't know of any medical reasons that would prevent you, but I'm scared, I can't think, like I said, I don't know that there are any. Monetary, I know 2 or 3 people now who are in their 80s living on a very fixed income who found a way to go get this done because it was that important to them. And, like I said, it's that desire is what Yah looks for. And, say you're planning to go get circumcised. You decided you want to accept the covenant and you're on your way to get circumcised and you're hit by a diesel and you die. Is God going to keep you out of heaven because you weren't able to get physically circumcised? No. It goes back to that stubborn, unresponsive. You were responsive. You were doing it. You were responding to what he said. Just because you weren't able to get it done in time, I don't believe that he's going to keep you out of heaven. That said, who knows? Another one, what if you were circumcised but not in accordance with the Torah? Do you need to be recircumcised? No. There were plenty of nations that were around Israel and that traveled with Israel that were practiced circumcision. And, if you were circumcised and you wanted to participate in the Passover and join with them, it didn't say you had to go be recircumcised. It just said as long as you were. So why you were circumcised isn't important to God. The fact that you do it. That if you're not, that you do, and that you do your sons, that's what's important. Whether you were done for medical reasons or something else, it's not that important. And I think that's all we're going to be able to get to today. We'll be doing studying the Mikra starting tomorrow.